which means I think, having pressed that, we are already live. Oh, that's exciting. Right, good. Can you hear? Can you hear us? Well, can you hear me, everyone? Jon is here. I'm here. Jon is here. Hi, Jon.
Hello.
Good. How's the audio balance, everyone? This is the bit that is irritating for everyone in audio-only mode, where it's like, they're all like, why are you saying hello repeatedly? Just start the bloody podcast. But everyone listening in audio-only mode, it's because I record it live. They wouldn't happen if I didn't do them live. So they have some element of irritating repetitiveness, and bad, non-existent editing. It comes with the territory. Jon, you're a regular listener. How much does it irritate you? Moderately. You're allowed to say a lot. That's fine.
No, it doesn't. I think of it as like on many podcasts you get adverts at the beginning, and I tend to hit the forward 30-second button, and then I get to the
that's
5225.
That's a very good. Yeah, I was going to say that's a good bit of advice. Although actually, increasingly, a lot of the content seems to be happening before the Intercity 225. But anyway, right. So, let's just get on with it. So, firstly, I'm just going to make sure I'm on the right screen. Good, the right screen is here. Jon is going to sit in the background and comment on some of the news before we kick off. But first, I've been dithering. Today I was in Milton Keynes and back. Crikey, I need to work out how many railway miles I've covered today. But I did manage to make it. So that's why we're an hour late. Sorry, everyone, for being an hour late. But it's because I possibly could have done it, but I don't know, it would have been a push. But anyway, this way I'm here on time, and also Jon and I had a chance to actually get the slides in order. So, but if you want to find out what the hell I was doing, then you can go on Twitter and go to Pointless Perambulations, and you'll find it. It's on my Twitter feed. Anyway, I need to work out how many. That was me. It's me. Oh, have you just put the feed up or something?
I have.
Yeah. It's me. Sorry. I was like, oh my god, what have I broken?
No.
That's right. It's better you checking that than me actually breaking it. Hello to everyone in the chat, by the way. The COVID stats. Interesting, actually. Obviously, we've got this continued rise, but it seems to have steadied in the last week. But the stats are always a bit funny. Because they're always about 5% behind, as in they always underestimate. But these kind of dotted bits, you can see they always generally underestimate. But you can see everything spiking. Cycling's given a nice spike again, which is good. Road travel is definitely, there's a general trend you can see there. You can sort of see that general trend. Buses, likewise, seem to be a general trend, quite steeply upwards, actually. If Deirdre's watching, I'm sorry if you don't agree with my trend lines, but I think that's broadly what's going on. Rail, as ever, there's absolutely no trend whatsoever, but you can see generally things are improving. If we zoom in a bit, you can see we're kind of bouncing along according to the data, and we're bouncing along at between 70 and 73%. I mean, trains are full, and what's interesting, and I'm going to try and get hold of this data directly from GBRTT, from the transition team at GBR, because they've started publishing it. And I think it should, if it isn't, then it should be public domain anyway, which is this data. So it's on to the news. Any thoughts on the COVID stuff? I don't know. There's not really much to say, is there? We kind of generally trains are getting pretty full now.
Yeah, I tend to ignore the cycling ones on there because it's so all over they tend to be so all over the place that I don't know whether it's because they're national or determined by the weather or something like that. But I feel like there's a lot more different pictures going on in different cities, like urban areas and boroughs even, that have invested more and invested less. That it's quite. I'm not sure how useful an aggregate is. The rail one's interesting. The national rail stats, because they tend to revise them after a week, don't they? And they tend to always revise them up. So whenever I tweet them out, I always just ignore the latest rail stats. But then by the time you do, they're late basically. The underground ones don't seem to be recovering too much either, actually, as much as National Rail, which is they're sort of stuck mid-60s, aren't they?
Yeah, and actually, we'll talk about that in the next slide, actually, because well, firstly, the cycling is a mess. I do a rolling. All the others are instantaneous, but the cycling one, because it's so all over the place, I do a rolling 7-day average to just sort of smooth it out a bit. You're right. It is a bit fairly useless kind of national trend, but it's kind of interesting. But the rail one is a reasonable guide. And actually, so the GBRTT data I've just been referring to. Hello to the transition team. Hello everyone. If you didn't want this to be published, sorry. I found my way to it through a series of people sending me this. Several people sent me this data independently, so I was like, stuff it. I'm putting it up. People need to see it. So I only tweeted this screenshot of a larger data set because I think it's kind of probably the most interesting one. This is, bear in mind, this is from a month ago. So things have got quite a lot better since then. And this is really interesting because it breaks down between, so the colours here are different market segments, and then there's a bit of a sort of sub-breakdown. So the red here is commuting. So this sort of section here is commuting. And you can see that even a month ago, long commuting was at 68%. Non-London commuting was at on its way to 60%, and to and from London was at 50%. So everything's sort of at or above 50%, which is interesting. The green here is leisure. Now, bear in mind these are automated and pretty. I'd argue potentially reaching the point of obsolescence. These segments, but anyway, they are the current measure. And even a month ago, short leisure travel was at 110%, and it's still climbing. At this point, it was still climbing. It's obvious it'll be even higher than that now. So that's climbing rapidly. Mid and long distance commuting were at 90 and 80%-ish, respectively. So the one that's there's the within London travel, which is its kind of own thing here, which is at 75% a month ago. The two interesting ones, and this is why there's a massive shortfall. This is why what's called the yield, so the relationship between ridership and revenue, is one that's interesting. And because the whole business model for the railway is broken because it relies pretty heavily on season ticket holders and first class travellers, and I think that's this category here, which is the inverted commas business. I'm doing rabbit ears, but I don't have my face up. Business travel, and both of these are 20. These are both less than 30%, so they are climbing, but much more steadily than the other sectors, and that is accounting for quite a major shortfall in revenue. So that's kind of interesting, and it helps. It helps give a feel for what that generic aggregate number in the previous slide is in terms of the different ridership, because all of the long distance operators that I have people within are saying that they are well above pre-COVID levels now, even though some of them are running a much reduced timetable. TransPennine are running 60% of the timetable. Cross Country are running potentially even less than that. I think it was 50% at the worst point. So there are lots of operators that they are slowly ramping up. LNER are running a full timetable. Avanti, I don't know. I've not actually heard anything about Avanti loadings, but when I was on the train this morning and this afternoon, it was absolutely heaving. So, yeah, anyway, there's some data in relation to COVID. Does this match up with what you've been spotting and hearing, John?
Yeah, I think I think it's interesting to see which operators are running full timetables and which ones aren't. Like LNER, that sort of longer distance business travel, but also leisure travel. Whereas I think things like Southwestern Railway, and even Southeastern, even going into London, a lot of those are still running very much sparser timetables. Like the line that I'm on goes from coming in from like Bromley South into Victoria via Brixton. I think they used to run like 4 to 6 trains an hour before the pandemic, and it's still at 2, which is
good grief.
Yeah, it's a real cut, that is. And apparently Southwest trains empty a lot. I think in the chat, Uncritical Simon makes an interesting point about whether fuel prices will affect things or drive modal shift or reduce road coming up. I don't know whether there's. I suspect there probably won't be any modal shift here because of it. But I don't know if you saw the news in New Zealand the other day about New Zealand cutting public transport fares in half. To encourage people to shift over.
It's a very obvious. It's an obvious solution, and it's one that will absolutely, definitely not get grasped by Treasury. To just know that it's not going to happen. But yeah, we'll
probably get a fuel duty cut, which they did in New Zealand too. But we won't get the sustainable bit of it.
Yeah, exactly. They'll do the bad thing. They won't do the concurrent good thing. Other COVID data. I'm hoping to get. So this is a paper that's been authored. It's come from Creds. Which is what is I can't remember the acronym for the institution. Anyway, authored by among others. So authored by Gillian Annabel, Llynos Brown, Ian Doherty of Transport Select Committee with me last week fame, and Greg Marsden. So a really good group of people looking at transport data, really looking in detail at the data, at the travel trends as a result of the kind of pandemic. And it's very interesting, and I'd quite like to get Gillian on actually to talk about this paper because there's a lot. So that's a future one. But kind of key themes, I'm not going to dwell on them, but key themes is that car traffic is not actually quite back to pre-pandemic levels. Weekday car traffic has stabilised around 10% below pre-pandemic levels. So that's car traffic. So that's not. So HGV traffic is making up that shortfall. So clearly HGV traffic is above those levels because at the moment the numbers are around about 90 to 100%. The next one is about working from home. It has played a critical part in reducing traffic levels. Even if people who have worked from home go back to travelling for half their working week, there'll still be a reduction of 16% in car commute miles. So in a way, that's a good thing. It's good to see that working from home has actually reduced car commuting. That is a good thing. That's only a good thing. Another good thing is that car ownership has fallen, which is really interesting. The sale of used and in particular new cars has fallen below pre-pandemic levels. That's actually, again, very good news. There's a significant increase in the number of households reducing from 2 to 1 cars. The pandemic did not lead to a dash to the car. So that, again, is good news. We can be reassured by that.
It's interesting because there was a lot of anecdotal evidence that I saw that was the opposite. So it's interesting to see that. I wonder if that's maybe to do with more increased home working. Maybe if people who were previously commuting by car aren't doing it, even if some people have switched from public transport.
Yeah, this is why I want to go through it and pick through it because I want to understand the methodologies. But I have trust in the data wranglers who've been involved in this one. So it's interesting because it's debunking some of the stuff some of the things that even I was sort of expecting in terms of long-term trends. Retail spending broadly stable. People have been doing much more online shopping. Okay, that's kind of fine and obvious. And this one's again a really nice one. So there's a lot of good news stuff here, which is that many more people have walked more often. There was a huge increase seen in October 2020, and this has been maintained well into last year. So there's some interesting stuff there, and hopefully we can pick through that with Gillian. It'd be really good for Gillian to kind of do a bit of a presentation on that. Gillian, if you're out there, it'd be great to hear from you. So, the other there's so many news things. We're going to hammer through these. Right, the other thing is, obviously COVID is now over. Apparently, obviously it's not. But and this is absolutely borne out by kind of anecdotal evidence of seeing how few people, by which I mean basically no one, was wearing masks on the train. There's lots of the trends of the number of people who are avoiding public transport, the amount of remote working. This is interesting because this is now at 16%. So if anyone's saying everyone's working from home, here's the data to point out they're really not. The number of people avoiding large social gatherings is dropping away, and on all this stuff. This kind of the stuff you'd expect, to be honest. But it's just interesting to see it laid out. That we're very much kind of society appears to be moving back to normality, even though around the globe there are some very scary waves happening again. Hong Kong is a good example. Korea to a slightly lesser extent. So yeah, that's kind of really interesting. So let's keep going. The other big news, the really big news, is that the Carment derailment report is out. The RAIB, the Rail Accident Investigation Branch, have published the Carment report. The way that I've been remembering the results of that are the 3 C's, which is first is CDM, which I'll explain next week. Spoiler alert. The second is crisis management. And the third is crashworthiness. So those are the big 3 C's in the report of things that we can and hopefully will learn. Key paragraph in here from all the people who shouted very loudly at me a year ago when the interim report came out. Lots of people saying some fairly unpleasant things and sort of saying, he doesn't know what he's talking about, or he's trying to mislead people. When I was talking about crashworthiness of the HST. Key paragraph, which is paragraph 535 in the report. Kind of excerpts here that are worth reading. Firstly, the outcome would have been better if the train had been compliant with modern crashworthiness standards. There it is in black and white. Can't read that any other way. And also another thing that I got called out on at the time, but has now been vindicated, is the fact that the RAIB have said a comparison with the derailment at Grey Rig in February 2007 provides some evidence to support this. So they're confirming that Grey Rig was a good way to compare, and they break that down even further by saying that the ratio of kinetic energy to train weight involved in the Grey Rig derailment was around 1.7 times that at Carment, nearly double. and it occurred close to a steep embankment, which also adversely affected the train's post-derailment behaviour. So we'll be unpicking that next week, by the way. Spoiler alert. But the other interesting thing that's happened, I don't know how much you've been following this, John, is that so the unions immediately responded with saying, I wish they'd done this at the time, but they were obviously being tentative because they didn't want to be left without any backup to sort of support them shouting about it. But they are finally now saying that they don't feel comfortable driving these, not just from a driver safety perspective, from also a passenger safety perspective. And so they've said they've sort of got angry about it, and rightly so. Scottish ministers are considering are looking at the early removal and early retirement of the HSTs on the network. So good news for passenger safety, also good news for just comfort, because I have to say that much as they look snazzy with their exterior skin and the haggis storage stickers on the doors are fun, they're knackered old trains that don't ride very nicely and they squeak horribly. So probably a good thing for everyone if they're replaced. Ideally with bimodes, ideally with Stadler bimodes actually, because then they can be level boarding as well. Anyway, yeah, sorry, John, I don't know if you've been following some of the kind of the fallout from the report.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you completely. It's definitely the right decision. I don't know what I think the audience of RailNatter does tend more towards the sort of practical side of transport rather than the sort of enthusiast side of sort of being sad about old trains being phased out. But,
yeah.
I love the HST is great. I've got a HST mug downstairs, but it's not. Yeah, we should probably have new trains.
When it's as was pointed out, the train is literally a museum piece because that picture is from the National Railway Museum. They've actually moved it and hidden it behind where the kind of the peak and the delta are over in the corner by the entrance to the North Shed. But yeah, it's in the museum at the same time that they're being run around. It's not actually great PR. So yes. So anyway, right, that is for next week, as I'll point out later on. So there's another report which is very interesting by Motability, released this month, about the financial impacts to the economy of dreadful accessibility, a thing which obviously is something I champion. And they actually point out that annually there's a £72.5 billion hit to the UK economy per year by limiting access to transport, particularly to public transport. So that's a really interesting report. I don't know if we'll do a page turn on it, but it's certainly something that's very interesting. And if you've got things in there that you find interesting that you want to unpick, then do tweet me or chuck stuff in the Discord. I'm gonna continue hammering. This is getting relevant to today's episode. Actually, it's already 2017. Good grief! Small change for Castlefield. Castlefield have been given 84 million, which is some money. It'll be useful, but it's all for kind of tweaking signalling. It's not for any major changes to the infrastructure, and it might make some small change, but it's not going to make a big impact. In honesty, so okay, good, fine. It's a start, but it's not the grade separation or indeed the new S-Bahn tunnel that Manchester is desperate for. So that's, but at least it's something, I suppose. This is what we've been reduced to, which is what we have to fight. We need to stop accepting scraps and fight for good stuff. Anyway, another paper. Giulio Mattioli has always great on Twitter. Go and follow that Twitter feed. It's brilliant. But particularly there's a really interesting paper based on UK data looking at the impact of expenditures when fuel prices peak and looking at households that rely on cars versus those that don't. Very interesting indeed. The broad, as you'd kind of expect, but it's nice to see it backed up in the data, is that car dependency is absolutely a shackle for low earners. So if you want kind of social equality, then public transport and access to public transport is critical. And the paper is, I'm doing my best to try and pick out interesting papers in RailNatters because I think it's always good for us to look at the raw data as well as sort of the broader news stories. So go and pick up that paper; it looks really good. Stupid Elsevier. It's the sort of paper that should be available to everyone because it was paid for by public money, but actually you have to pay Elsevier £1 million to get access to it. But hopefully there are ways to subvert that. I'm not going to advertise them here. Cough. But also other stories at the same time because car dependency is a shackle for everyone. Because there's another paper. Another bit of research from Stefan Gosling looking at the fact that motorists generally underestimate the full costs of car ownership and policymakers and planners totally underestimate their social costs. This is nothing new. All of us watching this and listening to this know that. But again, it's interesting to see papers that back it up. Oof, I'm hammering through these, John, so we make some headway. What else in the news? Oh yeah, this is interesting. Mixed messages from the DFT. The DFT they've written a letter to all councils saying pause / cancel any road building that hasn't been appropriate, that's likely to increase carbon emissions. So this is good, but it seems pretty random, and I don't know whether it's a cynical power grab so that they can bring all the projects in-house and turn them into levelling up projects, or whether it is a genuine positive move by the DfT. I'm so cynical at this point and so kind of jaded that I have no idea. Did you spot this, John? Is this something you spotted?
I did see it briefly. Yeah, I have to say I agree. I don't know whether this is a striking example of the government trying to hit net zero targets, or whether it's weird, or it's difficult to say exactly where it's coming from. It's certainly not joined up. I think that's fair to say. Whatever's going on.
Yeah. It's absolutely true. It seems like it was out of the blue without any consultation to councils. And yet again, okay, if we ignore the fact that road building is stupid, that's a lot. That'll be a huge amount of local authority funding that essentially has now gone to waste from already slashed budgets. So that in and of itself is not good. Highways officers are as stretched thin as ever they have been. And so wasting their time with projects that are then cancelled is not a good use of them when they should be doing cycle stuff. Right. Go on.
I have to say, surely there's no road building that won't increase carbon emissions. I mean, it's
exactly.
It's a difficult criteria to meet there.
I suppose it's a case of it depends what black box they're using and what sums they make up. You know, the DfT is very good at trying to suggest that roads will reduce carbon emissions whilst just sweeping some stuff under the carpet. So who knows? Right, next news thing. Oh, we're getting closer to relevant stuff. So buses back on track. This is very exciting, and good grief, it's only taken 20 years of lobbying and local authority effort, but finally, Greater Manchester is taking much more control of its buses. Buses are indeed back on track, so to speak, because they're getting control. They're going to be able to control fares, and the first thing they've announced, they announced a load of other things, but kind of the key headline thing was the fact that bus passenger fares are going to be capped at £2. Across Manchester, daily cap of £2. Oh, maybe it's not daily cap actually, but it's a leg cap of £2. I can't exactly remember which way around it is, but anyway, that's very good news. So yeah, go to the Manchester Evening News for the latest on that. Charlotte Cox, in fact, has been on top of that story. So yeah, there's loads of good stuff on there to kind of understand exactly what's been happening and what's being proposed. But that's exciting. It's what devolution can deliver, which is the theme. Talking of which. Devolution chaos. There was a very interesting piece that was flagged up on Twitter by the local government Chronicle. Fascinating thing for everyone to go and look up there. I've no doubt. Lol. But they're looking at the absolutely chaotic approach to devolution that is currently happening. And they did this map, which is great, and it's going to lead us into the episode nicely. And we come back to this map, but this is a map of all of the different sorts of devolution and the different structures of devolution and the different geographical boundaries of devolution that are currently being progressed. And it's, good grief, it's given me a headache looking at it. It's quite something. It's
a great map, actually. I think it illustrates really well what a dog's breakfast it all is. I mean, you go back to the sort of, I didn't realise this until a few years ago, and I was looking it up, because you wouldn't be able to tell from looking at the system now, but originally it was, metropolitan counties and counties with districts nestled inside them, and it was actually quite a rational system. But then they sort of twisted it and they said, well, districts can become unitary authorities, and they got rid of the urban councils, the metropolitan councils, then said counties can also become unitary authorities, and then they were like, oh, also we need combined authorities, and smashed it all together and gave London a separate deal. And it's all very, it doesn't make a lot of sense. And it's hard to see how people can sort of be accountable, because who's following that? Who knows what's going on?
It's exactly. It's a recipe for obfuscation and duplication and waste, among other things. And so this is what we're going to be talking about. And hello, all of you watching. Oh, by the way, Detour in the chat is giving hints as to how to get access to those papers, by the way. So everyone who's in the chat, or indeed if you're listening audio only, come find the chat at the at the 23-30 second mark, and you can get hold of some tips in the chat. So without further ado, let's get on with it. Welcome to tonight's Rail Natter, everyone! Hooray! The Intercity 225.
Beautiful.
Oh, it's lovely, isn't it? Fading away. I didn't even give you the pre-warning to like not talk through the intro, and you just did it like an absolute pro. Just that was perfect. It was beautifully done. John, before we talk about your piece, which started this whole thing off when I messaged you like, mate, we need to do it. We need to do a rail letter on this. Let's just deflate slightly after a very rushed news. Hi, John. You're on. People can see you now at long last. I've had you wittering away at you.
Actually.
Yeah. Well, thanks. Yeah, thanks for coming back. It was the last episode was a really good one. We're drilling down into, but we kind of kept it because we were covering so much. Just casually covering most of Western Europe in one go. This time we're drilling down a little bit into some detail, which is we'll get onto that. But how have you been? You all right? You?
Yeah, very good. Very good.
I'm trying to think. Last time we spoke, you had just started, I think possibly just started doing your cycling videos. I think you were fairly early on in that process, and now, for some people, that's who you are. You're the guy who cycles around London. People have forgotten the fact that you're a significant correspondent.
Replaced rail travel as my personal brand, but I do still, it's all about sustainability, isn't it? I do still love trains, so we're in there. I think the last time I actually saw you was that we went for a bike ride around London, the two of us, didn't we? That was good fun.
We did. That was great. We have to do that again, actually, when the weather gets a bit
nicer.
It was horrible today. Yeah, that was great. It was It was quite fun. I was being guided around. It was great, everyone. Strongly recommend. Actually, I'll put a link in the description after this. Go find Jon's channel and watch those videos. If nothing else, they're incredibly therapeutic. They're really nice to just put on and sort of lean back and sort of gently let the world go by. It's very nice. But yeah, good. It's very cool. It's seeing like increasingly high follower count people start like sharing it out excitedly, saying, "Oh, I live by this," and also you're on the you're on the TfL website, which I think didn't Sadiq Khan retweet you?
Yeah, he retweeted it was a video of a particularly sunny day cycling through Hackney. I think I took you that way actually, and he actually sent it out twice, and he actually got a lot of grief for it as well because everyone was saying, "Oh, it's nice houses, it's Islington or something like that." But yeah, he wasn't deterred. I mean, Sadiq's quite a cautious politician generally, but he has thrown his weight behind low traffic neighbourhoods, which is fair play.
Yeah, definitely.
Although they're not his policy, they're not really his prerogative, but
yeah, for sure. Right, so I've just realised I've left the door open behind me, so any manner of chaos might happen down the mic. Right, let us crack on. So, so much is just constantly in my head. I just want to break into James Acaster every time I say it. It's really sorry to everyone who's like, yes, we know you watch Trash Future, but when you listen to so many episodes in a very short space of time, it brainworms into your head. John, you wrote this piece, and as soon as I saw it, I had to finally work out how to properly register for the independent website at long last to actually get in and read it. But it was worth it because it's a neat little piece summarising a lot of things that I think we're going to cover nicely in this episode. But yeah, in fact, I'm not going to get to talk about the piece because that's not the whole episode is. But that piece kind of came from some work done by Clean Cities. For anyone who doesn't know Jon, firstly, Jon is the policy correspondent for The Independent. So if you didn't know that, do. But I think everyone does. But Jon, I'm now going to get you to explain who Clean Cities are, because you said you met up with them to have a chat with them the other day. So yeah, who are and what are Clean Cities, and what do they do?
Yeah, so they're basically a campaign for sort of sustainable transport in cities, and that's a mix of active travel like cycling, which I'm into, but also they advocate for public transport. And they did quite a good report, which I wrote up and wrote that analysis piece off the back of. And they compared a lot of stuff like accessibility to public transport, affordability. But the thing that I focused on was in the news piece was affordability, because I think that's one thing where urban transit in the UK really falls down. And I really wrote quite a straight news piece about it, sort of showing, I think it was like the three UK cities that they'd included. I think it was Manchester, Birmingham, and London were basically all ranked at the bottom of about a couple of dozen European cities for affordability. And there's, I'm sure a lot of people on RailNet who have got very sophisticated views about rail fares and public transport fares in the UK. I'm very much not team Britain's a rip-off or whatever, but I think that is definitely more simplistically the case for urban transport.
Yeah.
Buses and where they exist, metros, although they don't tend to exist as much, are actually just very, very pricey. The London Underground is great, but comparative to other places, it's a very expensive system, although it's very comprehensive and you get a lot for it. But then, of course, buses the news we were talking about in Manchester earlier about the buses in Manchester being capped at £2. That's fantastic, but £2 is still actually quite a pricey bus. It's not, by European standards, that doesn't really get you too far. But basically, after I filed this piece, the opinion desk asked me to write an analysis of it, and I basically had to say why is this the case? And I think the thing that I wanted to hammer in that article, I had to think on the fly a little bit, but I definitely still think this is basically that the issue that we have in this country is that where in other countries you might have local authorities, regional authorities, sort of powerful cities with the ability to either raise funds to invest in public transport systems or also to subsidise day-to-day operations. That isn't really the case in the UK, and it's really, we talk a lot about devolution, but it's off in this country, and don't do a lot of it. But it's we talk a lot about it often in terms of sort of identity. I'll give Yorkshire its powers, give Cornwall autonomy or whatever. Give cities what other cities what London has got, and that's all well and good, and that's very important. It can be quite an emotional argument sometimes, but I think this is why I like what's going on in Manchester actually. But I think the important thing is actually to stress what is the practical use of this devolutionary power. And for us, people who are interested in rail, interested in transport, and active travel as well, something I'm also interested in, the ability to fund your own projects and to also choose to subsidise a system and to raise the revenue to do that is something that's really missing in the UK policy framework, which isn't missing in other countries. And you can run a decent public transport system without local government powers and local government subsidies. You can do it with central government. But the problem is that central government has to be interested in doing it, and they have to stay interested for as long as you want a public transport system, and they have to, just basically never decide that they're going to basically do what they're doing to TfL now. For ages, everyone was London's had it great, and to an extent, it does have a great public transport system in London. It's fantastic. Unfortunately, for whatever political reasons, the government decides it wants to hold London to the wall to make an example of it, or for whatever political reason it's decides. I honestly have no idea why they're doing it, to be honest.
It doesn't make any sense. It makes absolutely no sense. Not even from a weird, twisted ideological perspective. It's just bonkers. Yeah.
I personally think they're keeping it in their back pocket. A stick. You don't get unpopular in British politics by having a stick to beat London with. So you can. Keep it in the back pocket and break it out when it's useful. I don't think they've seen a useful point to use it, but if they can sort of hammer this like, city can't bankrupted the city or something, maybe that's something they'll find useful. But basically, we will. Sorry, I'll hand over to you in a sec. But basically, wanted to stress really that there's basically these missing local powers for transport, and that if we want to fix public transport, the devolution of public transport are two very, very very, very linked issues. If you don't fix devolution, then you won't fix urban transport.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so and we'll break down. Don't worry, everyone. We're going to break down into all of those themes in a lot more detail. So the Clean Cities Project. They've got a lovely website. Go find it. I have absolutely no idea what it is, but just search Clean Cities and it appears, I think. Again, I'll remind me in the chat to put a link into the description. So it's a really nice piece, and they've got, it's a very nice website, but they've got this city ranking. So you can, so it's, as you say, they've ranked cities, and they've ranked, as you say, 36 cities against a load of metrics. And indeed, here is the list. It's here. And where are the UK ones? So there's London, number 12, which is pretty good. That's mostly boosted by... I think it was, isn't it? It's mostly boosted by the policies, by the clean air policies, is the main thing that's boosting it, actually. So it's boosting London, because actually things like access to transport isn't great compared to others. Safety is pretty good. And then the space for people is dreadful. which is interesting. And you can go into the breakdown of all these, and there's a lot more detail on the website. You can hover over things, and it gives you nice little pop-ups with breakdown. There's also Birmingham. There's Birmingham. What else? We've got Manchester. So Birmingham's in 17th, Manchester in the 30th, and what have I missed? Edinburgh's 31st. Whoops. I think that's it. I don't think I've missed any. Anyone shout at me if I've missed any other cities. So we've got 4 UK cities there. And so Birmingham 17th, Manchester 30th, Edinburgh 31st. Birmingham is not great on a lot of things, but again, the clean air policy I think has helped. So again, it's getting a boost there. And then Manchester and Edinburgh just not great. They're boosted by the safety of their roads compared to London even, actually. So that's kind of why they've made it onto this list, presumably. But so it's very interesting to break these down. And you can go in and kind of, as I say, go into the website, hover over these, and you can get an understanding of how these break down. The key thing so John was alluding to this, and this is where you wrote the piece from, right? This is where you put your kind of news piece, was this one here, which is access to climate-friendly mobility. And there's a little infographic that Clean Cities did, which I think is really nice. And I think this goes in. So the piece that you wrote was this one. This is Ashley. So this is the first piece you wrote, right? And then this one led into the premium piece I put up earlier.
Yeah.
So, and there's a nice little graphic here. So it's showing that the top 3 European cities for affordable and accessible public transport: Paris on top, then Lisbon, then Barcelona, and then the bottom 3 are in decreasing order: Krakow, Ljubljana, and then at the bottom of the list is Manchester, 41%. So this is absolutely relevant to that news story. Go on, John. You look like you're itching to say anything.
Yeah, very much so. So, I mean, what the news piece highlighted was really just focusing in on the affordability itself, and that was where the three English cities just basically all landed at the bottom in slots, which was not great to say the least.
Yeah. Exactly. So you just and if you hover over it on the website, if you hover over it, splits I think into 3 things. One of which is affordability, and that'll be the data set, as you say. If you look at those 3 at London, Manchester, and Birmingham, they are the bottom of that ranking, as in they are the most expensive. So it's a good piece. It's well worth reading because it's just a little bit. I mean, all of us on here, everyone watching, everyone in the chat, everyone listening should get this already. Should know this. It's uncomfortable to see it in black and white, and I never get why this doesn't cut through. It never seems to cut through. Like, you'd hope that some level of embarrassment would exist to make action happen, but it never seems to, does it? It never seems to.
I actually think that there is sort of a folk wisdom about public transport fares being expensive in Britain. If you sort of say, you sort of say, get a TGV when you're on holiday in France, or have you been on the German trains? People say, it's really cheap, isn't it? And that isn't always true, but it's definitely true for urban transport. I thought the methodology they used for the affordability in the report was really interesting. So they didn't just compare the raw fares. They actually looked at the cost of I believe it was a weekly travel card as covering sort of an equivalent zone as a proportion of household income. And despite that, cities like Copenhagen, which obviously has an extremely high household income, still did very well, which is very interesting. I mean, I suppose you have to compare it that way to stop Krakow having it's going to be like not very expensive for a tram because incomes are much lower, but sort of by comparison.
Yeah, for sure. And as you say, this then led you kind of down the dark alley of exploring what the main blocker is. And I suppose your thesis is that the main blocker to improvement is in fact the lack of devolved power. That's the main thing. And you kind of explained a little bit, I think, in when you opened there, but I think we'll break it into a bit more, which is to actually talk about what devolution is and what it can achieve. So, firstly, I mean, the first slide I've got here is an image is the new Bank of England logo, which they very politely decided to add a Union flag rather than the previous St George's Cross onto it. It's very good, and then it made everyone in the Daily Mail very angry. To be fair, it's also stupid that it's called the Bank of England but anyway, we'll pause that. But I thought we'd go big face for a little bit while we just talk about what devolution actually is and how that ties back to the Bank of England and to funding powers and you've already touched on a bit of that history and a bit of the fact. In fact, before the news, you touched on a bit of that history of our weird relationship with boundaries and authorities and authority structure. So go for, have a look. Yeah, I mean, but basically the two of, we can open that discussion up a bit and explore devolution. But I mean, maybe the first thing to start with is to explain what devolution is and how you describe devolution to someone who'd never heard of it before.
Yeah, so I mean, I think the easiest way to describe devolution is the allocation of powers to local areas, and you can allocate all sorts of powers to local areas, but I think the important ones that you can sort of allow them to sort of manage their services and things like that. But I think the important ones are revenue raising, the ability to spend money or to borrow money and invest. And that's really sort of whoever holds the purse strings really gets, that's where the actual power is. Everything else is quite cosmetic. To an extent, local councils in this country tend to be really just like delivery authorities for national government priorities. So what I mean by that is the government will basically set a strategic goal and they say, oh, councils can do this. But councils often can't cook up their own policies from scratch and decide what they want to do. So even if they had the vision to do it, they just simply wouldn't have the ability to raise funding to make major changes. I think by devolution, I think you can talk about different layers. So you have devolution to local areas, local authorities, council areas, but you also have different sorts of economic units that you touched on earlier. So you have, say, for instance, city regions, and a city region like London has power to do things that other areas don't really have the power to do. And then outside of cities as well, though, in most countries have regional state government. So in the US, we're very familiar with the states of the union, but Germany also has states, and even France, which is considered a very centralized country, has sort of large, basically large regions. And these all, I think the important thing about having these different areas is that they allow you to, basically the person who's in charge of spending money is interested in this area, because the problem that we have in the UK is that the politicians, Westminster can only focus on a certain amount of, there's only a certain amount of political bandwidth in Westminster at any one time. And that's great for the capital because every MP is intimately familiar with the capital. And in theory, there are MPs from all over the country, but the problem is they're not all going to get the spotlight. And so if you have, instead of regional government, well, the regional government is always thinking about its region, and it wants to do what you might refer to as vanity projects in its region. Because it wants to.
Well, it's the biggest. As London has shown, actually, and it's a thing that it's weird that even the DfT is considered so as such a rubbish department by everyone in Westminster. But actually, arguably one of the biggest levers that any level of government has to pull is the transport lever, is the make more public transport or change road transport policy. It's a huge lever, and so it's a huge. That's why we see the success of public transport where devolution does happen, because it's a big lever, and local politicians want to pull it. They're excited to pull it. Yeah,
very much so. And I think another thing to sort of highlight as well is that although we have some power devolved to local authorities, as in just local councils, there's something inherently a region is inherently larger if it's a collection of different local councils. And some projects are just inherently for a region rather than a small area. So, a London borough, if there wasn't London regional government, the London borough of like Camden isn't going to build a metro system. It doesn't make sense because the travel to work area is over the borough boundary into like Westminster. It's into the city, goes to maybe Southwark or Lambeth, and the ability to have proper regional government allows you to sort of properly coordinate these sorts of transport projects, which inherently cross boundaries and aren't necessarily on political lines. I mean, that wouldn't necessarily be the case if we somehow had extremely rational boundaries for local authorities, but we don't. So it's really an attempt to build these sort of proper regions.
So if I skip us back to the Bank of England again. The reason I put the bank, there's lots of chat going on about Bank of Scotland and RBS and the other kind of national banks, if you like. The reason I put the Bank of England up, though, because it's the only one that's really relevant in this discussion, because as the sovereign currency issuer, it's the only one that can actually borrow. It's the only one that government can borrow cash from on a large scale. The Scottish government cannot, it cannot borrow cash from RBS or Bank of Scotland. They're not. Whereas the Bank of England is the one that essentially is in charge of GBP, is in charge of pound sterling, so can be borrowed against. And this is the challenge: is that only Westminster is allowed to do that. And so they hold they kind of hold the key to the safe, if you like, on borrowing large amounts of money. John, do you have any better explanations of what I just said to make that point?
Well,
everyone talking about
essentially the way that the Treasury funds most of its public spending is by issuing bonds, and in say the United States, individual states can issue their own debt basically, and they can borrow money, and that basically allows you to have something like, say, California high-speed rail. I mean, obviously, we're talking a much wider sort of a very different geographical area here, but the principle's similar. I mean, it would be interesting. Should we move on to sort of some of the ways that maybe European countries?
Yeah, let's do it. It's a good idea. So that's Bank of England, and it's worth saying. This is. I was perhaps before we do that, it was a chance to look very briefly at what that devolution you've talked about is and all the different areas. So all these different colours refer to different things. So the red ones are devolution deals. These kind of dark blue ones are the red ones are where there is an existing devolution deal. Although devolution deal it's mixed in terms of what that actually means in terms of powers, and it doesn't mean funding powers really. There are devolution talks in all these blue ones. The yellow ones are seeking to have devolution talks. The green ones are reorganising in some way, which is question mark. The light blue is that there's some local interest in devolution, and then the kind of this sandy coloured one is that no one cares, no one's talking about anything. And then the symbols within it are the fact that there's discussions about county deals and elected mayors. And also, my favourite one is this like red star here, which is trailblazers for further devolution. Pass. I have no idea. So there's all sorts of chaos going on. There's no, and none of this is happening with the intention of them getting proper funding powers anyway. So I think that's where, as you say, it's probably worth us then talking about what happens. What do you want to do? Do you want to talk about what full GB devolution could look like, or should we talk a bit about Europe first?
Let's chat about the map. Yeah. So I mean,
go on, yeah.
I think it's interesting. It's obviously a real patchwork, and I think the issue that you get here, the real overarching issue is to do with the political system. So in most countries you have we used to have one in the UK, you have quite a rational system of devolution. So you might have the country split into a number of regions, and then within those regions you might have local municipalities, which is actually what we used to have in the sort of the 70s and the 80s until Margaret Thatcher got rid of it.
Yeah.
Abolished metropolitan councils, and then we had no regional authority, but in city areas, which is the part where you probably need it the most. And the problem is that the way that these devolution deals have been done is basically the problem is that they're deals basically. So they go to local councils and they say, "Oh, do you want to team up with the councillors next door, put together a bid, and we'll sort of agree a sort of bespoke package of funding powers." And you end up with local authorities it's basically just horse trading between local councillors. So you end up with a local authority called like North of Tyne, which it's absurd. Like that should obviously be the Tyne and Wear, and there are sort of very obvious sort of places that are missing out on very obvious sort of large city region deals. And the way to actually build devolution city regions is simply to look at the urban and metropolitan areas of the country and draw boundaries around them and say, this region is here, this is the region of South Yorkshire, this is the region of West Yorkshire, this is the region of Greater Manchester, this is the region of Greater London, and simply give them the powers that you would give to a city.
Yep.
But that doesn't, or a metropolitan city, and that's generally what happens in most countries. But the reason it doesn't happen here, well, we used to have it. Local councillors basically don't like it because it means less power for them. And local councillors in both the Conservative and Labour parties have quite a lot of local power. They have quite a lot of power within the party, so They are, big wigs within local constituency parties. They sort of often have a constitutional role within the party, and they're an important support base. So if you were to declare war on all of them at once, then it would be your political career probably wouldn't be too long for this world. So that's why it doesn't happen. But I'm just here to say, well, do it because it should happen, because we need a consistent
the pressing pressures that we're facing, not just with climate change, but absolutely should be knocking heads together. But unfortunately, anyone who's been anywhere near local councils, local government, and indeed national government will know that it's such a constant power game of who gets to feel like they're maintaining the power that they've already got. And it's a shame that it's like that, but it is like that. And whether it comes from a place of that power, that power is how I help people, or I just like that power, I'm a glutton for that power, it does get in the way of this. And we'll get to some of the other problems with why devolution hasn't been happening properly. Obviously, this map is obviously just England, for anyone who's like getting angry that it doesn't include the other bits. So I've added all the other bits of the archipelago, including our friends over in Ireland. The Republic of. Yes, so...
Although Ireland actually probably the only other country in Europe which doesn't also have a strong regional local government. It's probably inherited from...
that is interesting. One for future consideration. So, right, let's... Now, this is a little bit fanciful. So for me, it's a bit what we've discussed already, but in fact, it definitely is. So what might full GB devolution? So I'm kind of parking Northern Ireland, partly because it's separated by water and so kind of has a different deal anyway because of the geopolitics there. But also it kind of makes the discussion a bit easier, and I'm not well equipped to go into the details of the devolution deal that Northern Ireland has. So I'm just going to look at GB for now. And we'll talk about what it can enable as well, and we'll get to some nice, happy, future, nice things. So we've already talked about chaos mode, which is just, as you say, it's essentially, it's the worst of all worlds, in that you've got lots of people who are just basically getting more mini empires that aren't talking to each other, and it's not very democratic, and it's not very accountable. A better option might be to follow the model of some proper regional large-scale devolution. So almost, if you like, a federal model, or sort of having almost a regional parliamentary level. So you have a strong breakdown of England. Wales and Scotland kind of remain as each as their own entities. But I've talked about this before, actually, ages ago, on what structure should the railways have. And I like the idea of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 regions. That is the right number, isn't it? I can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yes, 8. Where you have Northumbria as its own thing, Mercia as kind of the Midlands, East Anglia as its own thing, Dumnonia as a mixture of Cornwall and a bit of and like not quite along the Devon and Somerset boundary, but kind of you've got Dumnonia, and then Wessex, Thames and Solent, Southern as a big lump, and then the county of London. So it's beyond the council, the kind of Greater London Council boundary, but kind of out into the areas that, let's face it, really are economic hinterlands of the city. And actually, it gives you quite a nice. And I've talked about this in the previous episode. I won't dwell on it. But for me, this gives a much broader. So these regions with proper devolved power are the right size, to my mind, to actually direct. You talked about it earlier. These big projects, they don't work really if you're just looking at kind of one small kind of combined authority. A combined authority doesn't have the size, and likewise, a city is going to potentially, if it's just focused around the city, you risk just the kind of the city looking in and of itself. I quite like this idea, this being the model. John, your thoughts?
Yeah, so I mean, personally, I wouldn't draw the boundaries exactly like that, and I've actually tried to do this myself with regions. A couple of years ago, I tried sketching some out on the back of on MS Paint, and what I learned over the course of about 2 days is that no matter what boundaries you draw, like someone's going to kick off basically, and they get really annoyed. People get really, really angry about this stuff because it's not just about, because there's this constant tension between what's the economic and political reality, and then also what about identity.
Yeah.
So if you sort of draw, I tried doing one that was basically, you would call it maybe Northwest England, and I tried calling it Greater Lancashire, but I included Merseyside, which is apparently a big no. Don't do that. So
right.
Yeah.
Well, this is it. It's the cult. People don't like being affiliated to groups of people who they don't feel like they're affiliated with.
Yeah.
So it's all those cultural things. And again, this is kind of, and this is one of the reasons, not the only reason, but one of the reasons why almost no one's kind of bothering to fix the mess that is local authority boundaries and administrative boundaries.
Yeah, I was going to thank you immediately for it. I think the important thing is to remember is that this isn't a reason not to do it. After about 5 years, everyone will have forgotten and they'll be obsessed with being whatever they're now. I do think you mentioned about not just doing city regions but doing larger regions. I think there's a debate to be had about how you do that, because I think there is a value for metropolitan regions, say, to have their own.
I'm getting there. Don't worry, John. I'm definitely so. Yeah.
And in other countries, it doesn't sort of stop them having 2 layers or 3 layers or whatever. We shouldn't be shy of that.
So my personal model is that you have this regional level, and then overlaid onto that. So for example, you end up with these transport authorities. So we've already got some of these, Transport Scotland, Transport for Wales, Transport for the North, although they've had all their power stripped away from them, so they're not much more than a brand at this point. But on top of that, as you say, for me, I would then be overlaying the cities to have their own powers, like seriously vigorous powers for the city regions. And some of those cities are ones that maybe don't make the news much. So the Hampshire conurbation, for example, the South Hampshire conurbation is a key one. You've got, obviously, Bristol's in there, South Wales, kind of its own thing, South Yorkshire, West Yorkshire. But yeah, I think the East Midlands is a funny one because it's a bit of a tri-city spread out thing. But the East Midlands is always a bit funny because it's quite densely populated but sort of weirdly spread out. But yeah, so I think then you'd overlay a regional devolution with city devolution like this. And I think this is now where we can talk about what happens in other countries, because if we jump to the map of Germany, and we're going to sit the map of Germany here. This is the map that you put up in your last presentation, your last episode you're in, actually. And it's of all of the S-Bahn systems. The green is S-Bahn, the yellow is sort of tram train. And I think this slide is a nice one for us to talk about, firstly, what devolution looks like in other countries, as you sort of alluded to earlier, and secondly, what it can afford. And then obviously we'll go through the other slides. We've got some other slides of some other kind of tables and then some nice indicators of what you can get. But let's start with other countries, particularly in Europe, our close neighbours. What does devolution look like?
Yeah, so I mean, the answer is it varies, but in all cases, regions and city regions have the ability, and even towns actually have the ability to, in some cases towns, have the ability to determine their local transport priorities. They have the ability both to raise money to do it without having to go cap in hand to Westminster. They don't have to get the attention of Westminster. They don't have to lobby Westminster so much. It's more about you can elect local officials to do stuff and they'll do it. And they can also choose to subsidise local transport if they wish to, which is you might not want to do it, but it's certainly a legitimate choice. I mean, I think most people on the chat probably think you need some day-to-day subsidy for public transport, particularly urban transport, just because of the positive externalities. Getting cars off the road, just making cities nicer generally. I mean, we've got Germany up there, so it's an interesting sort of way of looking at how, maybe an example of how projects are funded in Germany. You might have heard of Stuttgart 21, which is basically a sort of a massive rebuild of Stuttgart's station. Stuttgart's a very, it's a reasonably important city in Germany. It's there. You can see it. Thank you for highlighting that. But it's not like the capital of Germany. It's not anywhere near the biggest city. It's not the biggest, most important financial city. And yet you get this major mainline railway project essentially to replace the station with a through station, which has all these benefits for, intercity trains, high-speed trains, but also a local S-Bahn. And that's the way they fund that is you get about sort of 1.1 billion from Deutsche Bahn, which is the state railway. And you get about 500 million from the federal government. So federal government's still there. They help out. But then the state of Baden-Württemberg provides, I think, about sort of 660 million. So, that's the state is their able to provides more cash basically than the federal government, and that project is not a good example of a project that's gone well. It's a notoriously poorly received project, but they actually made provisions for budget increases there, and in that case, it's actually another sort of 800 million from Baden-Württemberg, and another sort of 200 million from Deutsche Bahn. So actually, the cost overruns actually went on the local state, which is interesting because one of the sort of problems with getting public transport commissioned, infrastructure built in this country is often that Westminster sort of looks and goes, yeah, you say you can build it for this, but will you actually? And they don't like taking these risks. But if you can offload the risk on the local authority as well, that does help. I mean, in Germany, the states are sort of competent, so they can make bank loans, they can get money from the European Investment Bank. As incompetent to make financial decisions as a sort of legal competency. They can also raise local municipal taxes with something called I think it's called a trade tax. So it's basically a local corporation tax that they load on top of the national one, and that's their sort of main sort of revenue raising powers. It's not as restricted as council tax. Obviously, we have council tax business rates in this country, but they tend to be they're very restricted, so you can't really raise council tax very quickly without holding a referendum to the government, which is a terrible.
It's worth I'll cutting in, but it's worth. We'll come back to that specific point about levying business kind of rates on business, because London did do that for Crossrail. Yeah,
exactly. That's the example of where it did actually work. The funny thing about that is though that the sort of power to introduce the business rate supplement, which raised about 6 billion quid, I think it was.
Oh, wow.
very, very impressive. It was a huge amount of, a huge portion of the funding for Crossrail. That required, in the same sort of spirit of those devolution deals we're looking at earlier, it required a specific bespoke deal. So the government at the time had to pass a 2009 Business Rate Supplement Act to basically give them the power to introduce this local tax. It's almost like medieval kind of,
it is.
The charter that allows you to levy a single tax to fund a single project.
And we'll pick up on that again, and some of the challenges other cities in the UK have had in a minute, actually, and kind of we come to the next and last section. But so those are opportunities. What about other countries? Are there any differences? Any other sort of structures that you've seen that you think that, or do you think we've kind of covered it by describing what sort of happens in Germany there?
Yeah, so I actually think that there's a structure that we can sort of learn from. The structure we can maybe learn from the most in the UK, and is probably France. And actually, you might find that surprising because France is usually considered quite a centralised country, but actually, they have a system which actually allows you don't actually have to fix all your regional power. You can actually just impose this sort of on top of whatever structure you've got. And in France, they have a system called the basically local authorities are allowed, urban authorities are allowed to impose essentially a payroll tax on employers. So very similar to employers' national insurance. It's called the versement transport, or abbreviated to the VT. And that basically allows local regional authorities to impose a 2% tax on companies with employees of more than 11 employees. And it was originally introduced in the 70s for urban regions with over about sort of 300,000 people. But it's gradually, the threshold's been lowered. So you can actually, if you're just a town with like 10,000 people, you can actually impose one as well.
Wow.
Since the late 90s. And that was originally intended basically to be, it's very, very similar to the Crossrail business rates thing, actually, although it's a payroll tax rather than a business rate supplement, which is a property tax. And that allows you to basically raise cash. It was initially intended to raise cash for just infrastructure development, and it's been extremely successful at doing that. So I don't know if anybody knows this, but since the turn of the century, since sort of the year 2000, France has actually opened 21 trams.
Now I can. So I have a slide for this because. Yes, you gave me this table, which is really good. So yes, this is the table. This is the table of tram systems. Continue.
Yeah, this is a great table to study it. So you can see the column to look at is actually the reopened column, because you could do a table like this for the UK as well, because of course we had historic tram systems which closed. I mean, actually, the tram systems which were built have very little to do with the ones that they had back in the day, and they closed. They're very modern tram systems with modern rolling stock. That's much more like a rapid transit that a sort of cheeky UK politician might brand as a metro, even though it annoys everybody on Rail Natter correctly. And yeah, you can see that I said since 2000 they've built 21, but I mean there were a few they built before 2000 as well. They really got them going, and these aren't just single line tram systems. Like you could look at Strasbourg, which is I don't know if anybody's been to Strasbourg, but it's a beautiful city, and the tram is actually really the urban transport is what allows them to have this great pedestrianised centre. And their tramway I think has like 6 lines and it's like 55 kilometres or something like that. So these are like hefty systems. It's a sort of Manchester Metrolink style system, but in like 21 they've got them in probably about I think 25 cities there now. So yeah, that's important. But really that sort of gives local authorities the autonomy and power to invest. And in a lot of cases, the central government does provide additional grants, just like in the Stuttgart example. Yeah. But it's having that, it's basically giving local leaders the ability to plan and basically mostly fund it themselves. And it isn't just for investment. So it's also for day-to-day subsidy that tax is used. So you might wonder why is Paris Metro fares so cheap? Well, 40% of the operating costs of all the public transport in Ile-de-France are funded, which is the sort of greater Paris city region, are funded by the Versement transport. I think that's So it's huge. Like it's really big subsidy, and that's why it's very cheap. And you can do that in the UK. Central government did used to give TfL a block grant to keep fares low, but they don't anymore because they decided they didn't want to. But London would never vote not to do that. And if you think about it, really from from the sort of perspective of being an employer in the city. I mean, the downside to levying a tax is that someone's got to pay it. But I think most employers will probably be very, very happy to say, yes, I benefit massively from being in this city with fantastic public transport. And yeah, we can pay a 2% payroll tax to pay it. If they don't agree with that, well, I'm sorry, but we have to tell them that they're going to have to
Absolutely, yeah, for sure. And we'll come back again. Kind of
very controversial at all. I mean, you don't hear much whining about the Crossrail business rate supplement. I mean, maybe you do, maybe I go in the wrong circles, but it doesn't seem like it's been particularly controversial. And it's not just the capital cities that benefit. So, I mean, we talked about how the VT was able to be levied on even quite smaller cities and towns, sort of 10,000 population. So another good example is just basically allows experimentation. So most British people will have heard of the city of Dunkirk on the north coast, France, and Dunkirk has a couple of years ago made all its buses free.
In fact, I have a slide for it. Here it is. Here is their website. Their very nice website. Wow,
this is great. It's almost like we chatted about this before. So that says mobility for all. Your network, Debus, what the hell does that mean? Is 100% free.
This is the bit that everyone sees, and I don't think needs any translation. This is, it's brilliant.
And it does have. It's an extensive bus network, and I've actually used it. It's genuinely very good, and it was, I believe, as of like just before the pandemic. A lot of people are reasonably sceptical about free public transport. There are arguments that it can undermine service quality or deter investment, although it doesn't look like we need much deterring on that front with fares. Yeah. But there are legitimate arguments against making all your public transport free. But I mean, in Dunkirk's case, it seems to have been quite popular. I mean, I think as of 2019, the stats I've got in front of me are that ridership increased by 65% on weekdays and 125% on weekends, more than doubling. So it is big, and I've used them, and they're good. I actually use them in a really fun way, actually. I came across it completely by accident. I used to live in Belgium when I was Brussels correspondent. I got the train out to the extremity of the Belgian network on SNCB, the Belgian railway, and I walked down the beach with my girlfriend from De Panne, which is the Belgian sort of western terminus, to Dunkirk in France. And it's not a very long walk. It was very windy, though. It's nice. You go past...
If I hide our faces... I think you can see where you did that. So you walked, the beach is just up here, right in the top corner. If anyone saw it, I'm drawing on this map here. The beach is there. You walked along the beach, and then presumably then made your way into here, and then found your way into the bus network.
Yes, exactly. So I think exactly. So we crossed the national border, and as you can see, that red line there, is that the C2?
This thick one is. Yeah, it's C2. So
so it's it looks like it's every 10 minutes. That was roughly what I remember.
This map is great, by the way. You can get the PDF. You can download the PDF easily off the website. And it shows you frequencies. It has all the system, and it shows you all the frequencies. It's brilliant, absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, and that was an international bus we got the bus back to Depin from France, and it was free. So it was quite an interesting curiosity, sort of free international travel. Which I enjoyed. We sort of just rocked up at the bus station. I was thinking, are we going to have, do I have to get a smart card or something like this? Is it going to, because you arrive in a foreign city, you're never sure what you need to run the buses. And no, I was just able to get on it and go to another country for free, which was great. So, I mean, I'm not saying that you necessarily need to do what Dunkirk's done, and obviously this is rail natter, not bus natter, but it's a good example of what you are allowed to do, and that would simply not be possible in the UK. I mean, in this country, we look at, say, I don't know, a town, not city, like Reading, and we say, wow, Reading's got like a municipally owned bus network and like has a reasonable service. That's really good, but actually that should be standard. And like the weird stuff should be like, oh, we've made all the buses free, or oh, the trains are like, we have a train on every street or something. I don't know. But yeah, if you give local authorities the ability to experiment, some of them will get it wrong, but a lot of them will get it right. And overall, I mean, there's a lot of international best practice out there. There's a lot of cities that are doing it right. It's actually pretty difficult to screw up making public transport affordable if you just spend a bit of money subsidizing it. So I actually really think that this that sort of giving people this sort of generalized versatile transport, or like just extending the business rate supplement or something like that. But I mean, or maybe making it a payroll tax or something to that effect would be a really positive thing that would allow you to invest in it. And you could see in France, I mean, people's national stereotypes are very outdated of all countries, and most people probably don't think of France as a particularly good urban transit country, and that's because it wasn't. Those 21 major tram systems were built since the year 2000.
Very quickly.
Very quickly, I mean,
and there's a lesson there in terms of this stuff needs to be happening quickly. Look, we haven't got time to be faffing around for 20, 30 years, British style. This stuff needs to be happening quickly. The only way it can happen quickly is by local authorities getting these powers. There's something else I wanted to pick up on, actually, which is maybe like it picks up into like ideology a little bit in the UK, which is perhaps there is a perception, and I'm gonna contradict myself in a moment, but there is a perception within Westminster that local authority, or certainly within both little and big C conservative circles, that the public sector cannot innovate and cannot do exciting new alternative things. And in order to prove that point, don't give them the opportunity to. And like, as you say, experimentation, it would be awesome if sort of smaller city regions or towns could do some of this experimentation. Like, you know what, we're going to try free transport for 2 years and see what happens. And then see what happens, see what the result is. If it doesn't work, fine. Okay, you then ramp it back up again, fine. But, there are opportunities there. But then what's frustrating is that you look at a report which admittedly Treasury is basically just set fire to and chucked in the bin, but the Bus Back Better report actually did cite the fact that Reading's a good example. They cited Reading and Nottingham as examples of good practice of local authorities being innovative with, or kind of at least municipal bus companies being innovative, essentially on behalf of the state. So it's strange, isn't it? There's just so many. We're just so close, so opportunities just there, but we can't. Something is stopping us, which is a tactical segue, because the next section is for us to kind of close out. We're already at 9:15. What is stopping us? Let's talk a bit about what's stopping us. I mean, Treasury is one of them, obviously. I don't know, but there are others as well. So Treasury is there, our favourite friends, getting in the way. But there are other things as well. And we talked about business rates being something that London was allowed to raise without running a referendum. Other cities, not so much. But so that's one. The other, I tell you what, I'll go through these, and then we can kind of maybe do a bit of a sweep up at the end. So the other, this is a great. Thanks for sending this link through. This is an old BBC News article. Do you remember when the BBC News website looked like this, everyone? And this is interesting because it's saying our trams at the end of the road. Long-awaited tram schemes for 3 areas of England were scrapped within 4 weeks of each other in November. This is not the Tories, by the way, folks. This is 2005. This is the new Labour government scrapping local transport systems for Merseyside, for Hampshire. I mentioned Hampshire earlier, and for Leeds. Everyone remembers the Leeds ones. They don't remember the Hampshire and the Merseyside ones quite so much. So so this is an example of a serious problem. I don't know if you want to talk about this article, and then we'll kind of talk more broadly. But maybe just very briefly talk about this article and what we can kind of pick out of this.
Yeah, so I mean, you summarised it very well, but basically there were these tram systems that were planned, and it's actually interesting in the context of we were talking about France, because these are tram systems that were being planned at the same time as many of those tram systems were being planned in France, and the difference is that they didn't get built at the same time. And the reason they didn't get built, I mean, I don't like to personalise politics, so I think you can say, yeah, there was a guy in the Treasury or the guy in the DfT who basically just didn't care about this stuff and didn't want to do it. But that's always going to happen, and you need a system which allows local authorities and local communities to build their own infrastructure, build their own assets, build their own and subsidise their public transport if they want to make that choice. Without the direction of central government. So giving them generalised powers to do that is really important. And you talked about ideology and stuff like that earlier. And it's important to remember that the reason that the metropolitan councils were abolished by Thatcher in the 80s was because they were seen as bastions of, without wanting to get too political, they were seen as bastions of municipal socialism.
You can full blast get super political. Rail now.
They were seen as bastions of municipal socialism. And other stuff that I thought, it's worth mentioning, this sort of, you've got these sort of Merseyside, Hampshire, Leeds, South Hampshire, Leeds trams, but there was an earlier phase of sort of local authorities organising their public transport properly, and that was Merseyrail, Time and Weir Metro, stuff like that, and that all happened under the passenger transport, the local passenger transport boards, which were sort of a function or ran parallel to the metropolitan councils. And the reason you got these basically half-finished systems just built in the 70s and the 80s was because you had these, and then the structures to sort of plan new projects, to run them properly disappeared. A lot of these, by the way, were funded largely funded by central governments. I mean, I believe the Tyne and Wear Metro was like 70% done by central government. But that doesn't disprove the fact that central government. Firstly, you need local governments to be there pushing it, to plan it, and to provide a bit of support and to properly deliver it. But also, it's not to say that you're never going to get someone in the Treasury in Westminster who wants to spend money somewhere. That does occasionally happen. The problem is it doesn't consistently happen, and it doesn't consistently happen for everywhere in the country. So if you want to do levelling up or whatever the buzzword is, you need to give places the powers to do it, and people know what they need in their local areas. And so allowing them to build like public transport and subsidise it is basically a bit of a no-brainer, I think.
Absolutely, and it's so depressing. Where to even start on this? Let's skip to a tweet by Tom Forth that I think makes the point quite neatly about some of the challenges. We talked about what London was able to do, admittedly after an Act of Parliament was passed, but London was able to raise its own business rates to fund. It was allowed to levy business rates to fund or to put money towards funding Crossrail. Actually, go to find this tweet by Tom Forth, everyone, and the one following it, he shows where he takes the extract from a certain Boris Johnson Esquire, saying that there's no need for a referendum to actually enact these powers within London, whereas if Leeds wants this, and indeed if other cities want this, they've inverted commas been given these powers, but only if they run a referendum of local businesses, which essentially means that they don't have the option to do it. They're blocked from doing it. We talk about whether businesses do and don't want it. I think there's a trepidation among councillors to do a referendum like that if it didn't go their way, because that obviously is a political impact. So it's basically a bit of a deliberate catch-22 to trap them from actually using those, being able to enact and make use of those powers. So they've almost been dangled in front of them to say, look, yeah, we have given you them, but actually materially they don't have those powers, and that's incredibly frustrating. So if jump back to Treasury, there are Treasury issues, but I think you're right. It pervades a lot of the structures of central government, and it also, as we've said elsewhere, local government has the challenge as well. We saw the Yorkshire deal was kind of shot down. I mean, okay, it was designed to be shot down. It was designed by central government to be shot down, but local and regional infighting dragged that process out and potentially helped to harpoon it as well. So there are a lot of other kind of interplay politics that get in the way as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And just to clarify, I've talked a lot about trams and a lot about buses, but I mean, we also mentioned S-Bahns, which are important. I mean, you need to have this, I think we all agree that you need a central Pickwick tunnel in Manchester. It'd be great to have a Crossrail for Birmingham, West Yorkshire, like all sorts of places could do with one. And of course, a city like Manchester should have a proper metro system as well, and things like that. So it isn't just trams. But yeah, and those projects can be locally funded, but also with central government help. But yeah, you're absolutely right about the Treasury. I'm actually very much a convert to this. I've for a long time wanted to abolish the Home Office, and I'm genuinely convinced that the culture there is terrible, and also
absolutely abolish the Home Office,
just for cultural reasons in the department. And I think the Treasury is one of those things that just needs to be broken up and put out to pasture. Replace it with a normal finance ministry, and also have a separate economics ministry that's loaded into biz, because that's what most countries do and can't hurt. I don't think they add very much apart from pickled rigid dogma, to coin a phrase. So there is a sort of institutional bias in the Treasury. I mean, you talk at length, and one of the great points you repeatedly make, and I hope you'll continue to make, is about the Green Book being a pile of it's rubbish,
absolute rubbish,
and just sort of basically. I think people intuitively know it is as well, but people find it difficult to express it. So if you say to somebody who lives in Leeds, like, oh, you can't have a tram because, like, we looked at the cost-benefit analysis and it turns out, like, you don't deserve one, or, like, it just wouldn't be worth the cash. Like, Leeds is the largest urban area in Europe without a tram or metro system. Like, it's ridiculous to think that it couldn't do with one. I mean, anybody who's been... Basically, we need to get away from... You made this point, and I'll make it again for you, hopefully. We need to get away from, like, looking at individual projects and going, oh, what's cost benefit analysis on this according to the Green Book, and just going, what do we need to run a functioning city, to run a functioning society, and then just build it. And you should probably look at the costs of stuff and make sure it doesn't overrun. But being led from that angle is being overpowering, sort of having that end of the bargain. Calling the shots is very much the tail wagging the dog, and is a joke and just needs to end. And it's bad.
We should build the society that we want to live in. Like we shouldn't be deciding what society, what the structure of society should be based on conditional formatting in a spreadsheet. We should build the society we want to live in. There are some questions, some key ones, Alistair. I've spotted your question there. There are some key questions we'll get to. I just want to, incidentally, no, kind of entirely coincidentally, we'll come back to questions, but I'm gonna push us on to the kind of the outro, purely by coincidence. I happen to have a new mug out. I said that I wouldn't say the phrase, but there's a there is a certain sort of theme of this mug that people might sort of want to buy into, as it were. Maybe someday we'll do an episode about this particular theme and actually explain what it might look like. But to do that, we'd need an expert from the IFG or someone to come along. Anyway, we're going to come back to questions.
By the way, very happy to endorse that mug. We can attest that I actually messaged you the other day asking when they would be available to buy.
Your message prompted me to get on with doing it. So everyone has Jon to thank for this new mug, the new Railnatter mug that you can go and buy. I don't know whether it's up on the website yet, but it will be. And if not, tweet Masket and prod them to get it up. So the outro, and then we'll come back to questions, and we'll maybe do a bit of a wrap up with Jon. But as usual, we are available on all podcasting platforms. I'm sometimes a bit tardy with getting the podcast thing up, but it is generally Is it appearing in RSS feeds? John, I don't know how you listen to it. Is it seeming to be mostly roughly appearing?
It works now, yeah. I had a great treat actually because I forgot to update the feed for about 6 months. So I've been listening to several episodes about Wales recently.
Oh yeah, nice. Yeah. So yeah, you can listen to that. The usual sort of the usual plugs. The merch at Masket, of course. The PayPal.me/Gareth Dennis to chuck loose change at me with vigor and violence. The Discord server to continue all this chatter here is at GarethDennis.co.uk/Discord. And you can support me to make more of this sort of thing happen by going to patreon.com/Gareth Dennis. There is a Patreon. You can support me. It's a quid. It's just a quid. You can pay more, and indeed some people do. Looking at you, Graham. But yes, it's just a quid, and it allows you to get bonus goodies. Pay what you can, not what I tell you, etc. What else? So I'm going to plug this again. I'm going to go and book it, so I'll get a date sorted. I think it's generally going to be in May or possibly early June. I think it might be late May, early June, which are approaching fairly quickly, but I'm going to go and book it in. But there is going to be it's another live audience one. It's a pre-record with a live audience, and it'll be in York again. And I'm quite excited about it because the last one was a lot of fun, but there were only just less than 20 people at it. This one I'm aiming for 50, I think, 50-ish. So that should be exciting because it was a lot of fun. And I was lecturing in front of a room of 40 people today, and I was enjoying myself. So it reminds me that I really enjoy doing these live, and it'd be quite fun to get a guest. So maybe I need to think about getting a guest in for that one because having two of us in front might be really good fun. Anyway, next week, as I kind of alluded to, we're going to be looking at the Carment report. We're going to look through the RAIB report for the Carment derailment. We're going to go through the whole thing in detail, kind of from one end to the other. It could be a long one. I'm hoping that it shouldn't be, but it's a detailed report and it's worth us digging into the detail of that, I think. So we are going to look at that in great detail. Bring our two sort of faces back. John, we've got some questions. Before we close up, let's answer a couple of questions. We've been asked a question that we definitely will not be able to answer by Alistair Baldwin. Alistair, former guest and friend of the show, asks, the key question, why does the DfT retain powers to approve applications, you know where this is going, John, for individual cattle grids, cycle tracks and closing individual roads? Why indeed? It's a rhetorical question to indicate how bonkers the power distribution is between central and local government. It's a bit like the potholes thing, right? Potholes have been taken away from local authorities and turned into a capital investment project that's administered by central government. It's like, wait, what?
Yeah, the other one thing that I think is in a similar vein is I was reading the legislation for stop signs the other day, and each one has to be approved by the Secretary of State for Transport, every stop sign. So that's why you don't see them very often. I mean, maybe that's one that you would that you'd want in there because you don't want to overuse them. But yeah, it's interesting. It
is interesting. We have another question, which is great, which is from the Campaign for North East Rail. I owe you a couple of DMs. I'll be getting back to you. But the Campaign for North East Rail asks a very good question, which is, do you think devolution, as we have been discussing, would contradict the idea of a powerful rail body that can fund improvements autonomously? Yeah, that's a good question. What do you think on that, John?
Oh, that's a good question. I think you're better qualified to answer it than me. I think you've got a better...
Yeah,
But I'm happy to speak my brains anyway.
Yeah, that's the me approach. Do it.
I think you need to have a balance. Honestly, it would basically be down to the specifics, wouldn't it? I think you probably end up in a sort of tripartite or whatever. You'd end up with a lot of negotiations going on, but currently you have to negotiate with the DfT anyway. So, why not negotiate with some railway managers?
Yeah, exactly. And actually, this goes back, and I included the slides earlier of what my idealized devolved structure would be. I'm not. It's not a hill I'll die on with that structure, but that feels like a good one, given kind of what I've experienced the way Britain works. But if you go back to the what structure should the railways have anyway episode, which was ages ago, I kind of talk about how those would overlay and interact, and ideally, if you've got those regional levels from a transport perspective, matching the broader administrative functions with the same outline. At the moment, they all are a mess. None of them overlay properly, which means you've got to talk to multiple ones, and it's a huge waste of human effort. I think that things will run better with those talking to each other, even if rail investment is to a certain extent... Well, actually, to be honest, John, it's exactly what you said. You'd have that mixture, wouldn't you? Deutsche Bahn committed some of the money to Stuttgart 21. Yeah. Then the local region committed some more, and the city region committed others. So that's almost the overlay that we've described. So you'd have GBR at the top, with then the sort of larger region committing some cash, and then the city region, if it's a city project, committing. So I think that can work. It's a good question. HST Trains, your question is so broad I cannot possibly begin to tackle it here. Let's see. Let's see. If I need a guest, lots of people saying hi if we need a guest for the live one. Ooh, interesting. Okay. Simon Wadsworth is asking, should GBR just build the line service if the funding is provided outside the normal enhancements process? None of this dual grip process. Oh golly, that's a good but a complex question. Yes, there are challenges with having two different organisations running concurrent similar approvals and assurance and development processes. I think, yes, there's a lot of duplication that would be best to be got rid of. How exactly that works and who leads that, I think for a railway project, it feels like the Railway Authority should lead that. But for other, for like city projects, when it's kind of multimodal, maybe it should be it's a good but tricky question to answer in this context. Right, okay. No one else is. All the questions have disappeared. Marvellous. Jon, given that I've hogged you for an additional, technically I've hogged you for an additional hour and a half beyond what I should have because I delayed it to 8 p.m. Thank you so much. Have you got any last words before we wave vigorously to everyone? Are you?
Thanks very much, and I'm looking forward to coming back for a third time in the future. Can I plug my cycle videos as well?
Yes.
I know we did.
I'll definitely do that.
Do search on YouTube for London cycle routes, and I basically just show people how to cycle from one bit to the other, and I always welcome new subscribers and also requests. So I'll put a link in the chat as well.
Definitely do that. I'll put the link in the chat, and also I'll put. Actually, you might not be able to put the link in the chat, Jon, but I'll make sure it's in the description. And definitely go and do that. They're great. Honestly, they're great. I'm a subscriber. I watch them, and I've recommended them to my mother-in-law. She cycles a lot in London, and she makes good use of them to join the dots and find. And you can use bits of them, which is quite good. So if you've got a particular bit that you want to do, you can almost sort of link them up. The next step is to go crazy meta with them. So if you draw an alignment, it picks multiple sections of the YouTube video. And anyway, that's for the future, right?
Right.
Yeah. Nice. You tweeted it from the account. So people, the London Cycle Routes account there with Jon's grinning face. Go to that. Jon, it's been a brilliant one. Definitely we'll have you back for a third. It's when you write another corker of an episode that gets me very excited. I'll just grab you back on. That was great. Everyone in the chat, thanks so much for watching. Everyone in audio only. Oh, go on, Jon.
No, thanks very much, guys. Good chat.
It was excellent chat. It only remains for us to vigorously wave goodbye. Cheers, everyone. Cheerio.